get this thing adjusted. You guys all see the jacket, right? All right. Last thing I want you to do is tell my sponsor that I wasn't dressed properly. Speaking of sponsors, I'm sober today because of great sponsorship, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and working the 12 steps and a loving God that I found by working the 12 steps. And my sponsor is, his name is O.C. Freeman, and he's about, I think, my 6th or 7th sponsor. I keep outliving my sponsors, which is one of the downsides when you get sober young. And O.C.'s just had a stroke, and so his mind's not what it used to be, and so I'm in that transition of I've asked another guy to keep me accountable and that I'm responsible to, and that's a big part of sobriety from my book. For those of you that have heard my story before, I always start the same way. Where are my AAs? Where's my AAs in the room? There we go. Awesome. There's all my alcoholics. Where's my Al-Anons? Why is not every hand in this room up? Right? If you're going to be an effective sponsor, you're going to have codependency issues. You need to be working both programs. And I always start the exact same way. Al-Anon is a fantastic program. My first Al-Anon meeting was when my dad got sober, and it was coming up on 42 years ago. So I'm a product of Al-Anon. I was actually in Alateen. It was a group that actually had an Alatot meeting, and once a month, everybody met together. The AAs, the Al-Anons, the Alateens, and the Alatots all got together. We had one giant family meeting. When AA was first started, for the first 13 years, it was one program. If you read their steps, they're the exact same 12 steps, But we work them from a different perspective. We work them from the codependency perspective. And if you want emotional sobriety, my experience is you need to be going to those meetings. And one of the things you'll hear me say is, I'm powerless over alcohol. My name is Dave Fredrickson. The reason I say that is because one day I was in an Al-Anon meeting and I wasn't paying attention, and they called on me, and I said, "Oh, my name's Dave Fredrickson. I'm an alcoholic." And I looked across, and the woman that was sitting on the other side of the room had this look. You could tell she had had the shit kicked out of her the night before by a drunk. And I just made that meeting an unsafe place. So if you go to Al-Anon, by all means, do not announce yourself as an alcoholic. All you need to know is what your first name is, And if those of you who have never heard me speak before, I am a crybaby from the podium. So I hope you brought some Kleenex. So I got sober on December 5th, 1981. And I'm a first-timer. I didn't see the necessary. As a matter of fact, a group of friend of mine's out in California, J.R. Harmon, his group has hats made up, and then it says, "Stay." They don't use the expression, "keep coming back." They're like, "Come on in and stay. Sit all the way in, come all the way in and sit all the way down. You don't have to do this again." So if you're new and you're coming, brother, welcome. Fantastic. 11 days sober, that is awesome. You don't ever have to take another drink. That's the gift of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, you can if you want to. We're not going to stop you. We're not the alcohol police. But it's not necessary for your story. You can come in. But one of the things that I did when I first got sober was I got a sponsor. I didn't want him. I think they drew short straws, and he got the short straw or something. Carl Rosell was my first sponsor. He will always be my sponsor. He taught me the 12 steps. Carl is long since dead. And like I said, I've buried a number of sponsors in this program, which is one of the most dangerous things that can happen to you. Because as you're sober for a little while, you depend on it. It's your safety net. It's your go-to person. They know everything about you. And when that void happens, man, it is really hard. And if you haven't thought it through, I would highly recommend that you think it through. What happens if you lose your sponsor, or they move away, or whatever happens? Because as you'll hear in my story, I got really, really sick in sobriety because I had a sponsor die on me. And I didn't bother to get another sponsor. It was a rough point in my sobriety. So I got raised in an alcoholic household for whatever the heck that's worth. A couple bucks will get you a cup of coffee. My dad was a Navy fighter pilot, heavy drinking kind of a guy. As you can imagine, in an alcoholic household, we had all the same things you get in any alcoholic household. Coming home and, there was, the 4 raised panels on the front door. Well, 2 of the panels are missing and one of the bottom panels because he ran out of implements after he punched and kicked his way through the front door, in a drunk.
Dragging my mom down the stairs by her hair at 3 o'clock in the morning, was not an unknown occurrence. That's the kind of chaos that I learned growing up in an alcoholic household. But I also was very quick to pick up on the fact that alcohol was the center, because we always had to wait. No matter what time of the day or night it was, when Dad got home, we had to have a cocktail hour, which was, I guess, popular back then. And, we'd all could have been waiting for 3 hours to eat. Now Dad's finally home, but we had to wait while Dad mixed a cocktail because he could not have dinner until he had a cocktail. So I knew there was power in that magic elixir, and I knew at some point I was going to get my hands on it. And he bought a little farm up in northern New Jersey in a little town called Chester, and he wanted to be a gentleman farmer, and as a kid growing up, we became, slave labor, basically. The fact that we all made it through our childhood with our fingers and toes, he never taught us anything about farming, and it's dangerous, with the gears and equipment that's spinning around, and it was very lax as a kid growing up. We had access to things that no child should have access to. And, of course, naturally I gravitated to it. Today I probably would have been banished from school, but for kindergarten I brought live ammo to show and tell, because I had access to shotgun shells. And I thought, hey, how cool is this? And I had 12 gauge and 20 gauge, and for some reason they frowned upon that, and I couldn't figure it out. But that's how my academic education went. I had tremendous anger inside as a kid growing up. I didn't know how to get an outlet for it, and I was always a big kid for my age, and so out on the playground, they took a dim view because I would always play King of the Mountain, and it was my toy, whatever it was, and other kids would try to play with it, and I'd push them off, and so early on they started sending me to the principal's office, during playground time because I couldn't play nice with the other children, it was in that principal's office that I really first experienced unconditional love, because there was a lady there that knew that I was a troubled kid, and she'd always pull me into her arm, and she'd tell me I was a good kid, and she always had jobs for me to do. She had a mimeograph machine, and for those of you who aren't old enough to know what a mimeograph machine is, it was this thing, and you had to crank it, and out would come copies, And so I would sit there, and she'd save all the mimeograph. So I'd spend my afternoon, instead of being on the playground, I wasn't missing the playground. I was busy, and I understood what service was because of the love of this lady. And it would be years from that point where I felt unconditional love until I landed in Alcoholics Anonymous. So my younger years were chaos, and when I was 13 years old, I guess I was 14 years old, my dad got sober. And you'd think that would be one of the best things that could happen to our family. At the time it was. I couldn't see it that way. I thought it was one of the worst things that had ever happened, because that meant the SOB was now home on a regular basis. And I was just getting started with my career, and of course he was being one of us. He knew exactly what I was up to, and he was constantly busting me, And back then it was easier to get other substances. So the first time I got arrested for dealing drugs, I was 13, twice when I was 14, twice when I was 15. And, but when I turned 15, magic happened. My older brother turned 18, right? And my older brother Bob and I, from a description standpoint, are identical. We're the same height, the same weight, the same hair color, the same eye color. I know his name. They can't trip me up on the address or the birth date. It was the perfect ID. So when he turned 18, I snuck into his wallet and I stole his driver's license. And until 9/11 in the state of New Jersey, they didn't have photographs on your driver's license, And so once I got a hold of that thing, man, the gloves came off, because I could go to the same bars that my dad used to drink in, that I used to be the little kid drinking the Shirley Temples, in those bars, and everybody knew me, and they'd say, "Oh, hey, Dave, I haven't seen your dad in a while," and I could drink in there with impunity, knowing that, he wasn't associating with those people anymore. And so my career in drinking just took off from that point forward. I graduated, I'm proud to say, in the lowest quintile of my high school class. Most of the people that had a lower GPA were already in prison. I probably should have joined them, with my trajectory at that time. But I realized if I wanted to drink successfully, I had to get away from my father. He was constantly in my grill always catching me. And I couldn't figure it out. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was probably, 10 or 15 years sober. I couldn't figure it out. I'd come home from a night of drinking, right? And there was always the one light in the kitchen all the way at the back of the house. And it was a Center Hall Colonial, so there's this long hallway to get back to the kitchen. And I'd be very careful, and I'd sneak in. And the house is like a 1730s or 1740s. It's an old farmhouse. So everything creaks. I mean, everything creaks. And it's how quiet you are to get that front door open. And I'd start in, and one foot would step in the house, and I'd hear, David? Oh, no. And then it's a long, dark hallway with a light at the far end, which is, if you've ever had the spins or anything, that's really difficult to navigate a hallway when your light is all the way at the far end, And so I'm kind of ricocheting off the walls, and I'd get down to the kitchen, and he'd always be sitting at the far end of the kitchen table, and I wouldn't step in the room. I would just kind of peek my head around and say, hey, old man, how you doing? To this day, that's what I call him, old man. Hey, old man, how you doing? And without missing a beat, he'd say, you've been drinking. And I'd be thinking, how the hell does he know I've been drinking? Does he have a nose like a greyhound? I couldn't figure it out until I was about 15 years sober, and I went, you dumbass. If you'd been out, you were drinking. It wasn't brain surgery. He just knew it, So he called me every single time. So when it came time to go to college, I knew that was going to be my escape. So I literally, no exaggeration, I took a map of the United States, I stuck a stick pin in New Jersey, and I drew a 2,000-mile circle. And I only applied to colleges outside that circle. And with my stellar GPA, I basically had to find a college that would take you if you had enough money, And so I did. And it was in Prescott, Arizona. And like I said, my dad was a pilot. And so I figured I'd follow the old man's footsteps because I saw how little he worked and how much he got paid and how much he was able to drink. I'm thinking, yeah, that's my kind of a deal. So I went out to Prescott, Arizona, and I started to spiral out of control very, very quickly. My first semester, I got a couple good grades. In my second semester, a lot of incompletes, And by the third semester, my first semester, my sophomore year, I drank my way out of college. And while that was going on, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde would take over. I could be in a bar with my best friend, and you could be sitting next to me, and you bump my elbow and make me spill my drink, and I literally would put you in the hospital. I had this rage inside that would just come out, and I couldn't control the rage. I found out I had a taste for bar fighting, and it sounds really terrible, but I actually liked hurting people because I was in so much pain myself. It was one of the only times I felt any kind of relief. I used to think back then that the perfect job for me would be to be a hitman because I just didn't have any emotions in my mind. I felt like I had a switch, but the reality was it was lying to myself. I was a terribly emotional person. I just shoved them way down, and I was pouring so much booze on them to try to make those feelings go away that they wouldn't surface. The problem was when I'd start to drink, here they come, and I had no control over it. And it's kind of a weird scenario in my family. I have a twin sister, all right, my twin sister Nancy, and we are like about as diametrically opposed in any possible way that you could possibly have. She was straight A's, trying to be valedictorian of her class. I don't think she made it, but I wasn't paying attention, and I was the other direction, and we were born on my father's birthday, so we had a triple header birthday in our household, and so I had long since told my parents, I don't want to have anything to do with you, just leave me alone, and I was out in Arizona going to school, and one day my parents showed up, and it was coincidentally, the 18th of October, and my birthday's the 19th, and they're like, yeah, we came out to take you out to dinner and celebrate your birthday. And I said, geez, you should have let me know. I've got plans, And so I went out with my buds, my drinking friends. And in the little town in Prescott, Arizona at the time, there was only one really nice restaurant. And my parents got to see me while they were eating their birthday dinner without me. I was standing up at the bar drinking. And to this day, when I stick my hand in my pocket, sometimes you feel that little piece of lint. I get a flashback because I had this little piece of lint and I was so ashamed. So terribly ashamed. But I couldn't not drink. It wasn't a choice of whether to go to dinner with my parents. That would have been great. I would have got a free meal, surf and turf. They would have bought whatever I wanted, right? But I couldn't do it. It was much more important for me to go get a drink. I had to drink at that point. I'd gotten to that point. I had a little refrigerator next to the bed. At that point, I was to the point where, I'd pray to God when I'd come to. I wouldn't wake up. I would actually come to that there was still one in that refrigerator. And if there wasn't one, you'd start looking around on the floor, scanning the room. You ever do that? And you look around, you see something with some liquid in it, and you kind of crawl over to it, and you get a hold of it, and you spit out the cigarette butt that's floating in there, and and now you might be able to make it to the restroom. That's where my drinking was taking me. From October 19th till December 5th, when I came out of the coma, I did not draw a sober breath. It was just one downward spiral. I got thrown out of school. I would gotten a number of fights. It was bad. My last night, I decided it was time to celebrate, and I bought a bottle of 151, and shockingly, nobody wanted to drink with me because, I was like this crazy man. And so I drank the bottle of 151 by myself and proceeded to fight. And I won the first three and lost the last one. I didn't even know I was in it. I had beaten up 3 roommates, and they were quads, 4 guys to a quad, and they shared a common living room. And the 4th guy was the biggest guy, and he came home and found out I'd basically put his other 3 roommates in the hospital. And he tapped me on the shoulder. I was stumbling, looking for my room. And as I turned around, he caught me with a left hook, and I went down the staircase, and I landed on my face and crushed my face. And I got up and ran into the desert, and it's just a miracle I didn't die that night. And I ended up in the emergency room at Yavapai Community Hospital in Prescott, Arizona. And I did the thing that I swore I'd never do. The very first person I called was the man I hated the most. I called my dad. I said, "Dad, I'm in trouble." And he said, "Yeah, I figured you would be." See, that trip out to Prescott, Arizona, my father had gone to some AA meetings, typical what alcoholics do when they're traveling. And he went to the AA meetings and said, "I'm either going to need somebody to 12-step my kid, or I'm going to need pallbearers." And so literally within probably an hour, I was in intensive care. There were people in intensive care from Alcoholics Anonymous. And that was my first vision of service, because my father had picked up the phone. He had the phone numbers ready to go, and they knew who I was. And of course, it's an honest program, but they all lied. They all said they were family so they get in intensive care, right? And I got healthy enough that they could put me on an airplane, and they put me on an airplane. I flew back to New Jersey, and they put my face was so crushed you could touch my nose and it would kind of like slide across my face, And so my mom got a whole bunch of pictures and gave them to the plastic surgeon. And back then I thought it was great. They took this long piece of cloth and they dipped it in pure cocaine solution. It was delightful. And they jammed it up your nose, and then they kind of molded your face, and then they cast your entire head. So he was literally kind of like doing a sculpture with clay, And so when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, the only thing that people knew was my name was Dave and I had blue eyes because I was in a full head cast, And, that was my start, And it was also the source of my first resentment, because I'd been coming to AA for a couple of weeks, and I finally got the cast off, and I come walking through the door, and everybody's coming up to me like I'm a newcomer. They're like, "Hey, I'm nice to meet you." And I'm like, "Hey, it's me. I've been here for weeks," And I was unemployable, and my older brother, Don, he had crashed and burned like a month ahead of me at school and drunk his way out. So he was already at home, and when I got home, and the two of us were these 2 degenerates, totally unemployable. And so we did what we'd watched my father do, because when my father got sober, if you wanted to see my dad, you either had to go to work with him or you had to go to an AA meeting, because that's really all he did. Was he'd come home, he'd go to an AA meeting, he'd come home from that, he'd wait another hour or two, and it'd be time for the next AA meeting, and off he'd go. He'd come home at 3 o'clock in the morning from the diner or whatever, and he'd get up late the next morning and go to a noon meeting, on his days off. That was his routine. So what did my brother and I do? We just started going to AA meetings, and it was great, but we were just being in the fellowship. We were taking up space. We would chain smoke Marlboro cigarettes and eat Twix candy bars and drink Coca-Cola like it was going out of style. And then between meetings we'd go to the arcade. And for those of you who aren't old enough, an arcade was a place where there was machines and you put quarters in. You could play video games. So we did that. And one day at this meeting, this guy Carl came up to me and he says, "Hey, you got a job?" I said, "No." And my brother's standing right next to me. He goes, "You got a job?" And he goes, "No." And he says, "You do now." He says, "Where do you live?" And we told him, and he says, "I'll be there at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." And Carl was a Mason, and everybody on his crew was in recovery. Everybody. And so it was like being in an AA meeting 24 hours a day. Carl would pick us up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and he'd take us to the job site, and we'd be working on the job site, and it was very punctual. The crack of noon, boom, we'd stop working, everybody washed their hands, we'd sit under a tree, we'd have an AA meeting while we ate our lunch. We'd work again until 4:30, depending on what kind of job we were doing. We'd clean up, get all the concrete cleaned up so that we could leave very punctually. He'd take us back to the house because we didn't have cars. He'd drop us off at the house. He'd say, get something to eat. I'll be back in an hour. And Carl would go home, take a shower. He'd come back in an hour, pick us up, and he'd take us to an AA meeting. After the AA meeting, we went to the diner. So we'd have a meeting on the way to work. We'd have a meeting at work. We'd have a meeting at lunch. Then we'd have a meeting on the way home. Then we'd eat dinner. Then we'd have a meeting on the way to the meeting. We'd have the meeting. Then we'd have a meeting on the way to the diner. At the diner, we'd have a meeting. And then we'd have a meeting on the way home. And Carl would say, I'll pick you up tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we worked 6 days a week. If you can't get sober with that kind of dedication, I don't know what's wrong with you. Right? So one day, my brother looks at me, and unbeknownst to me, he'd been cheating, and he'd actually gotten himself a sponsor and was working steps. And he happened to mention that he was going to be doing his 4th step. And I said, really? And he said, yeah. And he says, I got to get it done because I have a 5th step scheduled with Leo on Friday or something like that. And I went, what? And I'm thinking, I haven't even started step 1. I don't really even have a sponsor. I mean, Carl's my sponsor, but he's in sponsor in name only. We really haven't done any step work, So the next day, I'm going to the meeting, and there's Leo in the meeting. And so I make a beeline for Leo and say, hey, Leo, I need to do a 5th step. And he's like, okay. And I said, how about Thursday? Because I'm not competitive, but my brother is not going to beat me to this 5th step. There's no way, So I go to Leo's house, and he tells me where he lives, and he lives next door to the church. And so I show up and knock on the door. And of course, I'm wearing ripped jeans and a T-shirt and smoking a cigarette, and show up at his. I got nothing. I got no big book. I've got no paperwork. I've nothing. I knock on the door, and Leo's standing there, and he opens the door, and he's wearing a collar. And I start laughing, and I'm like, Leo, are you going to a costume party? What's the deal? And he goes, no, I'm a Catholic priest. Man, did that put the fear of God in me. See, I was raised with no religion. By the time I was old enough to go to church and be confirmed or whatever, my dad's drinking was so bad that my mother one day looked at me and said, if you want to go to church and Sunday school, I'll take you, but if you don't, you can stay home and play. For a kid like me, I mean, that's not, what decision? Sure, okay, I got this one. I'll get 100 on this exam, right? So I was terrified. Everybody would talk about God in AA meetings, and I'd get up and leave. If I heard God mentioned more than like 3 times, it's time to go smoke a cigarette and drink another Coca-Cola. That I'm not going to sit in a meeting because I was scared because I didn't understand it. I didn't know anything about God, So here I'm sitting there with this Catholic priest, and, we're sitting down, and somewhere I had read something about telling your whole life story, So I just start spouting. I got nothing written, and what a great guy he was. He's like, if you want to smoke, go ahead and smoke. Gave me an ashtray, and so I'm sitting there smoking in his living room, and he knows what's going on. He's been sober a long time. At that point, he had probably 15 years of sobriety. And he listened to me tell a whole bunch of lies and embellishments, and then he gets done. He says, I didn't want to stop you, so it was very interesting to hear that story, but, you're really supposed to have something written. So why don't you talk to your sponsor and write something down, and we'll try it again next week. And I was like, damn. All right, so I was still able to go home and tell my brother, hey, I did my 5th step with Leo. I didn't tell him that I'd failed it, but I did tell him that I'd done it. So the next week, I still haven't talked to Carl, mind you. I haven't done any step work, so I show up, once again, totally unprepared. I have an envelope and a piece of paper, and I scribble some stuff some BS that I think is supposed to be what it's supposed to be, and, I look in the big book, and I do see the 3 columns, so I scratch a couple columns and write some stuff in there. I even plagiarized a little bit on it, and so we go through the exact same scenario, and this time Leo cuts me off pretty quick, and he says, who's your sponsor? And I said, Carl Rizal, and he said, good. He said, you talk to Carl before you make an appointment to come back, and stop wasting my time. He says, if you don't talk to Carl, I will. And I was like, ooh, now I'm going to the principal's office. This is not good. Why do I tell that story? The reason I tell that story is because even though my motives were completely inappropriate, they were underhanded, I was being competitive, I was doing something, and I was staying sober. So if you're sitting in these chairs and you haven't done the work that the book requires, just try it. Try anything. Anything is better than nothing, than taking up a seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. See, one of the things that people don't understand, and we don't talk about it too much, they did when I first got sober, is there's 2 pieces to Alcoholics Anonymous. We walk in through the door into an AA meeting, and everybody's got the alcoholic battle cry. I'm sorry, you just don't understand, right? That's the same answer we've been getting everybody off our back with our whole lives. But now we walk into a room where everybody does understand. And we get that relief, and we're like, oh, wow. For the first time in my life, I'm with a group of people that truly do understand, right? That relief is not the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's what we're supposed to substitute our drinking with. So if you were a daily drinker, you're supposed to fellowship every day. If you drank Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you're supposed to fellowship Monday, Wednesday, Friday. But don't confuse that with the program. The program is in this book, the Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is the 12 steps. And when you do the 12 steps, you have a spiritual awakening. It's hidden right in the 12th step. Having had a spiritual awakening as the result. Not a result. There's one result we're looking for. We're a one-shot deal here. It's to have the spiritual awakening. And I was sitting in Alcoholics Anonymous thinking I was working the program when all I was sitting in the fellowship. And thank God for Leo, because Father Leo called me on it and directed me towards the program. So I got with Carl. He took me through the book. Long story short, I get sober, right? Now I'm 20 years old at this point, and I'm sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. So what do? I'm working during the day. I'm doing construction, and I'm going to night school. And I'm trying to avoid women because I don't have time for women. I'm trying to get some goals. And, of course, but when you're 20 years old, women look awful good in Alcoholics Anonymous. There's something about them. You walk in and there's just like love at first sight across the room. And, I'll never forget Jim McCabe, big old Jim McCabe. He was fat. He was probably 350, 400 pounds. His son, Joe, I 12-stepped years and years later. But Jim came up to me one day and he said, "Hey, I saw you looking at that girl over there." And I said, "Yeah, man, isn't she cute?" And he says, "She's very cute." He says, "And I know I'm fat and I'm old." And then he got right up in my face. He says, "But if you even look at a girl in this meeting, stop trying to kill them. I'll grab some of these young bucks and we'll take you out behind this church and we'll beat you within an inch of your life. Leave the women alone." Whoa! That's old school AA, So I'm not stupid. What did I do? I stopped going to that meeting. I started cripple shooting at other meetings, right? And that's what I call it today, 13th step, and I don't call it 13th step, and I call it cripple shooting. Because people that are predators like that do that behavior, and I was one of them, we're shooting emotional cripples, and we're literally trying to kill people. It is a dangerous, dangerous business. Just recently, I had a guy try to do that at my home group, in ADR in Flower Mound, a Daily Reprieve. This guy was hitting on all the women, and I noticed I was kind of oblivious because, unfortunately, I was talking to my friends. I wasn't paying attention to what was going on in the meeting, which is what you'll do after we make some friends in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I started noticing that we used to have like 10 or 15 women every week. And then there was 8 women. And then there was 4 women. And then I'm looking around the room and there's like 2 women. I'm like, where the hell are all the ladies? This is like 4 weeks in a row. What's going on? So I finally picked up the phone and called them. And they said, "Hey, that guy's hitting on all the girls." I said, "Which guy?" And I said, "The crazy guy in the back?" And she said, "Yeah." So I went and had a conversation with him. I wasn't as direct as Jim McCabe was with me, but I basically told him, that will not be allowed to happen in this meeting. And then we called a group conscience, and we talked about it, and we made a promise. All the men in our group made a promise to the ladies that this group was going to be a safe group for women, that we were not going to allow that behavior. And it passed unanimously in our group conscience. That's the power of God speaking through the conscience of a group when it's directed properly. But it takes somebody to do that. It's scary because one day, you're this young kid going through Alcoholics Anonymous, and then one day you wake up and it's like the old timers are all dying off, and you are the old timer, and you're looking around going, "You chose me? What the hell is wrong with you people?" But there's a time in your sobriety where all of a sudden you're going to have to step up to the plate. It happened to me 3-4 meetings ago. I was at a meeting and this lady brought up some literature that wasn't conference approved. I know the literature. It's great literature. I have no problem. It's very spiritual literature. But it's not from Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that group. That group has a principle where they say that we will only share conference-approved literature. And I waited, and I counted to 3, and I looked around the room, and there were guys there with 45. There's one guy with almost 50 years of sobriety in that meeting, and nobody opened their mouth. And I said, "Okay, it's my turn. Excuse me." It's uncomfortable. If you want this thing to survive, at least my experience is, you got to really want it. That means sometimes stepping up to the plate and being the one that has to ruffle somebody's feathers. That's the beauty of old-time AA, is they wouldn't think twice about ruffling your feathers. They used to call me kid when I first got sober. And when I got sober at 50 Well Blackwell Street down in Dover, New Jersey. And there was a couple old-timers in there, and their motto was, if you still had a watch, you were too young to get sober. I guess that goes back to the 30s and 40s, and then they'd follow it up with something classy like, I probably spilled more drinks than you ever drank. And I'd say, well, if you hit your mouth better like I did, you'd get here sooner, because I was a little wise ass. But that's the kind of sobriety. They had all these little cliches, which I thought were stupid at the time, but now I understand them, So I get sober and I go to college and I'm at this school and I know every girl on campus. It's a small little college in Pennsylvania, and I'm coming back from summer break and I'm going to be a senior. I'm coming into my senior year, and I look up and I see these two girls walking across the parking lot, and I know every girl on campus, and I'm like, oh my God, look at her. Just, draw a dot. I was hooked right there on the spot. And as I walked past her, she smiled at me. And I'm carrying a box. I walk upstairs, and my roommate, Fritz Denlinger, was there, and I said, Fritz, I just saw the girl I'm going to marry. And he's like, yeah, sure. We just celebrated another wedding anniversary. We're still married to this day. At that point, I was about 4.5 years sober. So, it wasn't quite boy meets girl on an AA campus, but it was boy meets girl on campus. And one of the things that Carl had me do, and part of my 4-step, was there's really 5 inventories we do out of the book. There's the resentment inventory, the fear inventory, the sex inventory. We write a sex ideal, and we do a harms done to others inventory. And the sex ideal is a critical piece. And without that piece, I started to date in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I wasn't using an ideal. And then one day Carl pulled me up sharply. He said, dude, we wrote that ideal for a reason. It's a kind of an outline. It's based off your experience. Your bad experience, we don't do that anymore. So we try to do the opposite. The good experience, we try to do that and look for that in a woman. Try using that as an outline. And one of the things that was on my sex ideal at the time was I was always jumping into bed as quick as possible. That was my goal, was just to get into the girls' knickers. That was always interested. I actually called it strafing. I would just come in there as quick as I could and just fly right by. I was that kind of a scumbag. So here I met this girl that I actually liked, and I said, I'm going to have to try something different. So the night I met her, I sat her down and I said, by the way, just so you know, I'm almost 4 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I told her my story. And when she didn't run away screaming, which she should have, but she didn't, I knew we had a chance, And so I fell in love, and I introduced her to Al-Anon, which was really kind of cool. I took her to some Al-Anon meetings, and then I let go. I figured if she's ever going to do this, she's going to have to do it because she wants to. And she just celebrated 35 years. As a matter of fact, one of her first sponsors sitting in the back of the room back there, Mike and Maureen, well, they're friends of ours from New Jersey. It's great to see you guys. So we had this wonderful life, right? And life starts to fill up when you get sober with really, really good things. Once you clean up the mess that you've made and you have this relationship with a power greater than yourself, I went back to college. I graduated college, and then I said, I've always wanted to fly. I want to be a pilot. So I went to the military and I said, hey, can I be in the military? And they said, have you ever used drugs? And I went, yeah. And they said, how long ago? And I said, do a little quick calculation. I said, well, it's been 7 years. And the guy says, great. That's the cutoff. If you've been sober 7 years, he goes, it said right on the form that time, have you used the following drugs in the last 7 years? And I could say, honestly, no. It's like, awesome, And they did a background check on me, and I passed the background check. I couldn't believe it with my background, but I did. And, I ended up doing 24 years in the United States Air Force. How cool is that, to go from where I was to where they actually trusted me with multi-million-dollar airplanes? And life is good. And I got hired by the airlines, and so I'm working for the airlines, and I'm flying for the military at the same time, and I'm married, and I'm going to lots of meetings. And, when your life fills up with really good things, what do we alcoholics do? I don't need to go to that meeting. I got it. I'll go to the next one, right? And slowly but surely, I started knocking off meetings, until I hadn't been to a meeting in I don't know how long. It'd been quite a while since I'd been to a meeting, and I'd gotten distant from my sponsor, and then my sponsor was a young guy. At that point, he was probably 44, I think. He was on a treadmill, and he dropped over dead from a heart attack, And instead of getting a new sponsor, I had a buddy of mine, Dave, and he was a younger guy in recovery, and we just did that really sick thing that sometimes alcoholics do, where we kind of co-sponsor each other. Basically that's an unwritten thing, is if you don't call me on my crap, I won't call you on your crap. And so when somebody asks you who your sponsor is, you say me, and I'll say you, and we'll get along just fine type deal. And I started, racking up the years, and it got to the point where I got really, really sick in Alcoholics Anonymous. I had double-digit sobriety, and I was at a place where I was more emotionally sick than back when I was drinking, because I was taking credit for things that were really God's. I had stopped doing what I'd been taught to do by Carl, By that time, Carl was gone, and instead of taking somebody through the big book, that takes time, right, to go through the big book. I would throw them a 12 and 12, because I know that at least in the 12 and 12 they can find where it says step 1. If you don't know where it says step 1 in this book, it's going to be really hard to find it on your own, right? And so I was shortchanging the guys. I wasn't giving them what had been given to me, and my life started to unravel. And it got to the point where I didn't want to live, but I wasn't going to drink again because I knew that was instant death anyway, so I might as well just die. And I'll never forget it. We were living in Madison, New Jersey, and my wife was working for a bank, and I figured, I got enough life insurance, it'll carry her through, but it's got to look like an accident. So I was cleaning my service revolver with a round in the chamber, and I said, this is going to look perfectly, she'll come home and she'll find me, it'll be traumatic, but she'll get lots of money out of the deal to be okay. And the first time in all the years we had been married, the first and only time that I can remember, my wife came home early, and so I was trying to get up the nerve to put one in my head, and I heard, "Hey, honey, I'm home." I was like, "Oh, crap," eject that round out, and, that should have been a wake-up call to me, that I was in that much pain, but I didn't pay attention, and the cool thing is that with God is if he doesn't get your attention, he'll get your attention, and I was working my dream job. I was working for an international airline, and I was an instructor, and and of course I'm patting myself on the back. I'm breaking my arm, with all these how great I'm doing, and we were over in Europe, and this captain was getting ready to retire, and he had his wife with him on this trip, and it was kind of like their last hurrah. And being an instructor, I was pointing out everything that was wrong. Oh, that's not what the procedure says, and I was really being a pain in the butt. And finally, the captain turned around and he looked at me and he said, "I'm sick of you. Just sit down, shut up, and keep your feet off the seats. I don't want to hear another word out of you until we get to Kennedy Airport." It's like, okay, he doesn't need my services. That's fine. I'll just sit back here and pout. And we took off out of Milan, and we were flying up into the Alps, and he requested a valley visual, which is very unusual. Normally you're always on instruments. You go from instrument to instrument to instrument when you're out, because there's some big rocks out there. It's called the Alps, and we're flying closer and closer, and I can see him make a mistake, and it's a critical mistake. And the co-pilot is brand new. There was stagnation in the airline industry for years, and he had sat as a flight engineer, hadn't flown in 17 years, and all of a sudden, boom, now he's flying as a co-pilot. He was brand new on the airplane. Mentally, he was still back at the gate. He didn't catch the mistake. And I'm trying to get the captain's attention to say, "Hey," and every time I'd open my mouth, he'd say, "Shut up. I told you to shut up." And we nearly flew into the side of the Alps with several hundred people on board. We crossed the Alps in a full stall at 1,500 feet. And I used to blame the captain, when the reality is, I was to blame. I had taken myself, my arrogance and my ego had removed me from being an effective member of that crew to a point where the captain had to say, "Sit down and shut up." And we flew all the way to Kennedy. We overboosted all 4 engines, and they had this little reset switch. And they just reached up there and they hit reset. They were going to pretend like nothing happened. And I'm thinking, guys, we got to go back. We got 4 bad engines. We can't go forward. But they were not listening to me. They're going to Kennedy. And so I landed at Kennedy Airport. Every exit on the Belt Parkway, I had to ask God, "Please, God, help me not to pull off and get drunk." The pain was so excruciating. Here I'd gone from nothing to where I got the career I wanted, and the whole thing's going to go down the rat hole. Because these guys are lying. They're pretending it didn't happen. I mean, the flight attendants were saying the rosary in the aisles. You're not going to get away from something like that. And I drove to my home group in Mendham, New Jersey. And I walked in, and the first time I'd ever been to an AA meeting in full uniform. And I just sat there and I cried. And they loved me. They didn't ask me anything. They just put their arms around me and they loved me. They said, "It's going to be okay. We don't know what happened. It's going to be okay." And then I did, thank God, what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous taught me. You tell the truth. So everybody else is lying, and they're saying, what happened, Dave? And I said, I'm going to tell the truth, and I call the union, and the union's like, you can't tell them that, you got to lie. And I said, no, I'm not going to lie, I'm going to tell them the truth. I will. If they ask me what time it is, I'm not going to build them a clock, but if they ask me a direct question, I'm going to tell them the truth, I don't care what the cost, because that's what I'd been taught in Alcoholics Anonymous. It was a long series of hearings, the NTSB, the FAA, they all get involved, and when the dust settled, they terminated everybody except me, because I told the truth. So what does a good alcoholic do? He starts taking credit for it. Man, isn't that a good guy? What a fantastic guy I am, right? And God doesn't take kindly to that. So 4 days later, the phone rings, and I'm like, yeah, and is this Lieutenant Fredrickson? I said, yeah, this is Lieutenant Fredrickson. And they said, Lieutenant Fredrickson, you have been activated for the Gulf War. And they start reading this long paragraph, and I'm like, what? I'm a reservist. We don't go to war. What are you talking about? War. Going to go over and fight Saddam Hussein. Are you kidding me? What? And they did. So I went to my wife and said, honey, I don't know when I'm going to be home, but here's the financial binder, and off I went. At this point, I hadn't been to a meeting, and that was the first meeting I'd been to in a long time in Mendham. So maybe a couple of weeks I'd gotten meetings under my belt. I really didn't have a sponsor back then, and off I go to the war, and I'm still not doing the deal that I'm supposed to. But I had learned the basics from Carl very, very well. He always said, you always have a big book with me. I have one with me tonight. I always carry a big book with me. In my helmet bag, in my military helmet bag, I always had a big book and a 12 and 12. And it was during the Gulf War, and they were firing the Scuds, and we thought that this base was under chemical attack. And everybody's freaking out. We're reservists, right? Once a year, you go through your chem gear, where you put on your mop, and a flying chemical gear is, it starts with a charcoal suit. It takes about 20 minutes to put the damn thing on. You put on this charcoal suit, and then you have to put your flight suit back on, and then rubber gloves, and you're taping things up. And it's really we're not designed to be in a chemical environment. The ground guys, they got their suit on already, and all they have is a little mask hanging on their hip, and they slap it on in about 30 seconds, and they're good to go. With us, it takes quite a bit of time, and so everybody's whipping out their checklists, and they're trying to figure out anybody remember how to do this piece? Item number 9. Everybody's freaking out. I was freaking out inside. I don't know what possessed me, but I reached down into my helmet bag, and I pulled out my big book. First time I'd ever pulled out my big book in the cockpit. And I opened it up, and that sucker opened up right to the 3rd step prayer. I believe that was the first time in my life I honestly took the 3rd step and literally turned my will and my life over to the care of God. And I said a prayer. I said, God, if today's the day I die, today's the day I die. I'm okay with that, but let me do your will, whatever that is. And I meant it in my heart. Now, I'm not stupid. I put the chem gear on, and thank God it was a false alarm. But it was a turning point in my sobriety. So now I come back to New Jersey, and I've got all these guys that they're calling me, I'm sponsor in name only. I'm not really not working with them. I'm not giving them the gift that had been given to me. And so I go through the steps again. I get a new sponsor. And Leo at that point had been a snowbird. And Leo was back in town for the winter, was back in town for the summer, and he'd been down for the winter down in Florida. So now he's back in town, and I went to Leo, and I said, Leo, would you sponsor me? And he's like, yeah. So we went through the steps again, and I got my side of the street clean, but I had all these guys I had to make amends to. So I went to each one of the guys I was working with, and I said, I've shortchanged you. I took you through the 12 and 12. I didn't take you through the big book. I haven't given you the program as it was given to me. Would you do me please, let me do me the honor, let me take you through the steps. And they all said, yeah. They all forgave me, and I took them through the work. Well, those guys had sponsees, and so they're like, wow, that was really cool, but you went really fast. Could you take me and my sponsees through? And so then I'm taking 3 guys through at a time, and then 5 guys through, and then somebody says, hey, would you do a workshop? And I'm like, sure. And so then I'm taking people 20 through at a workshop, and before you know it, somebody calls a taper, and then thank God for AA tapes. I have about 30,000 recordings, no exaggeration, I got many, many miles away from home where I'm listening to AA tapes all over the world. As a matter of fact, during the Gulf War, Glenn Kay from the East Coast, he'd give me cases of tapes. He's a big taper on the East Coast. And he'd give me these cases full of tapes, and I'd take them all over and drop them off with the troops. I just drop off. And we had AA meetings all over in these Muslim countries where you're not allowed to drink. But AA was there. It was really cool. For all the wars, And that passage in the big book about how, if you try to escape from alcohol, even an Eskimo will come over the hill. I used to fly once a week or sometimes twice a week up to Thule, Greenland, where they're talking about, up at the North Pole. And we started a meeting on Thursdays in Thule, Greenland. There's an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. You can go almost nowhere on this planet where you can't find Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I'm doing this, and I'm carrying the message. And once you get on tape, your life will change, because then people have access, and they hear you, and if they resonate with you, they want you to come talk. And so now I'm getting on the speaking circuit, and I'm going all over the place. And this is back when they were on cassettes. And for those of you who aren't old enough, before digital, they had these things called CDs. They were like little donuts. And then before that, they had these plastic things you had to put in a special machine. And so I get this phone call one day, and it's funny because I always give my email address. I've learned to do that. My email address is aadave1@aol.com. I feel really sorry for AA Dave, whoever the hell that is, because he gets a lot of bizarre emails because they forget the one, but it's aadave1@aol. And I had done that on this series of tapes, and I got a phone call from this guy in Chicago. I'd never met a man, and Tom, and he says, are you Dave Fredrickson I'm listening to on tape? And I said, probably. And he says, do you work for the airline that I work for? And I said, I don't know. And what this guy has done, once a year, the airlines publish a list of seniority. And when you get hired, you get a number. And it's not a chronological number. So everybody in the company's got a number. And once a year, they publish a list of the seniority numbers. And this guy had, at that time, there was like 10,000 pilots at the airline we were with. And he went through 10,000 names looking for a D. Fredrickson. And he found my name. And then he was able to get my phone number from my employee number and call me up. That's how bad this guy wanted the program, And so he said, I'm out here, and I'm in this little town, and there's not good AA out here. Would you take me through the steps? And I said, I'll do it over the phone if that's all right with you. And so I took him through the 12 steps, through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous on the phone, talking to him on the thing. Before cell phones, they had these things called landlines, and they were actually connected to the wall. And so I talked to him on one of those, right? And I didn't think anything of it. I never met the guy. He was flying as a captain and out in Chicago, and I was in New York, and I was in the middle. I was a busy guy. I didn't have time to go running out there to see this guy face to face. I wish I had. I did years later, but at the time I hadn't. And he wore out those tapes, those cassette tapes, and then they had transitioned to CDs, and so he got a set of CDs. And I don't know what possessed him, but he gave the CDs to this guy in management at my airline. And so one day I'm sitting at home, and the phone rings, and it's almost the identical conversation. Is this Dave Fredrickson? I'm like, yeah, probably. What can I do for you? And he's like, I'm in management at your company, and I'm listening to you on CD. And I said, okay, what can I do for you? And he says, I want you to take over the drug and alcohol program for our airline. I was like, really? And he said, yeah. I was like, wow. Well, you see, at that time, we were living in this little teeny house. We'd moved into this little town nobody's ever heard of. It's called Green Village, New Jersey, except for you two. You know where it is. We're living in this little teeny house, and we started popping out program babies, which is the coolest thing. The kids have never seen us drink. We're raising these sober babies, but we've outgrown the house. And my wife's really on me, and she's like, we got to move. And I'm like, well, we can't afford anything in North Jersey. It's just prohibitive. And I said, well, I don't want to go to Connecticut. Taxes are way too high. How about Pennsylvania? Because when you're a pilot, you can live almost anywhere, and it was commutable from Pennsylvania to get out to Kennedy Airport, where I was flying out of. And so she's like, okay, but when are you going to take me to Pennsylvania? And I go, I don't have time to take you to Pennsylvania. And there was this newfangled thing called the internet, and you could get on the internet and actually, it was called Jeeves. It wasn't even, before Google. There was this guy by the name of Jeeves. You put in there, ask Jeeves, and Jeeves would tell you, kind of like Google, what the information was. And I said, and she starts on me. She's like, well, why can't we move? And I'm like, move where? She's like, well, why can't we go to Chicago? I said, way too cold and way too windy. Then she's going, well, why not Miami? And what she's doing is she's going through every base that my airline has a base at. And it took me about 3 bases before I'm a little slow on the uptake, and I picked up on it. And I said, well, there's only one place I'd even consider moving to. And she said, where is that? And I said, Flower Mound, Texas. Now, by that time, Mike and Maureen had moved down here in 99 or 94 or something, and they'd asked us to come down and speak. So I'd actually been to some AA meetings in North Texas in 99. So I knew that there was some good AA here, and I knew several of my pilot buddies lived in this, we call it the pilot ghetto, because there's all these pilots living in Flower Mound. It's like 8 miles from DFW Airport, So you can almost roll out of bed and you're at work. It's really kind of cool. So I called a friend of mine from the speaking circuit, Myers Raymer. Some of you guys may know Myers. And I said, Myers. I said, it's Dave. I said, I need a realtor in the program in Texas. I said, I don't want to use her. I just I just need a realtor. I want to waste a weekend because I get my wife off my ass. Honest program, right? So he says, yeah, call Jan. So I called Jan, and Jan, she's like okay with it. I said, I'm not going to buy a house from you. I just want a realtor. I want to get my wife off my backside. Can you help me? And she's like, sure. I said, okay, I want as many houses as you can see. By the time we drive back on Sunday, I want her crying on the way to the airport that she's seen so many houses that she's done with the idea of moving to Texas. And she's like, okay. So Honest Dave flies down here with his wife, doesn't tell her any of the plan, and we get down here and we're driving around and we're seeing all these different houses, and no, it's too expensive, it's not big enough, we're going through this whole rigmarole. And every time, and how it is in Texas, you get the street corner and there's like 15 builders have jammed their signs in a row, and I keep seeing this one sign, and every time I see that sign, that still small voice in my heart kind of pops up a little bit. I'm thinking, what do you think? You don't know anything, right? So we've seen at least 15 houses we saw like 9 on Friday and then 15 on Saturday, and we're just about done with Sunday. We're heading back towards DFW, and I see that sign again. It's the exact same builder, and that little still small voice goes up again, and I said, Jan, stop the car. She's like, what? I said, stop the car. I said, whoever that builder is, take us to that builder. And she goes, you can't afford that builder. You're looking in the wrong price range. I said, I don't care. Take me to that builder. So we drive to this model house in this development, and it's a brand new development. It's just dirt, and there's 2 model houses, or 3 model houses, the 3 builders that are building in that neighborhood. And so we walk into the first house, and I hear the words that no husband ever wants to hear, and that is, oh, I love this house. Right? And I had done some building back in New Jersey to make extra money when I'd gotten laid off, and so I kind of knew the building trade a little bit, and so I started negotiating with the salesman, and I swung a deal with him, and he's like, well, I got to talk to my boss. And I said, okay, talk to your boss. So he makes a phone call, and I figure he's doing the used car salesman deal. I got to talk to my boss. He comes back and he says, well, my boss says he can do it if you can meet this price. And I said, oh, well, for that price, then I want some extras. I want ceiling fans in every room. I want to blow the back of the house out 7 more feet. I want 7 feet on the back of the garage. And I threw everything but the kitchen sink in there, because he wanted an extra like $18,000 or something. So I threw in about $45,000 worth of extras, right? I figure it's dead now, So he goes, makes another phone call. He comes back and he says, yeah, my boss said okay. I'm like, oh, crap. What have I done? And he's like, well, I need a down payment. And I go, well, I don't have any money. And he goes, you got $2,500? And I said, yeah, I got $2,500. He goes, well, write me a check for $2,500. And I said, okay, but I want a weasel clause. And he goes, weasel clause? I never heard of weasel clause. What's that? And I said, well, I used to be a builder. I know what it's like. You can change anything about a house until the sheetrock starts to go up. Once the sheetrock goes up, it's too expensive. That house is pretty much locked. And I know I've put a lot of extras in, so 2 things. I haven't even put my house on the market in New Jersey, so I want to be the last house that's built in this neighborhood. And the second thing is, I want it until sheetrock stage. I want it, that I get my $2,500 back and I walk away, no questions asked, as long as if I can't sell my house in New Jersey. And he says, okay. I'm thinking, what the hell have I done? So I'm flying back to New Jersey, and I've got this contract for this custom-built house for $2,500. I'm going, man, I'm in trouble, So I'm back in New Jersey, and that's 3 days before the second phone call comes, right? So this senior manager from my company calls me and says, are you the Dave Frederickson, and that whole deal, right? And he wants me to take over the drug and alcohol program for our company. And I said, okay, what does that entail? He says, well, there's one catch. And I said, what's that? He says, you got to live in Texas. I start laughing. He's like, what are you laughing at? I said, you're not going to believe this. I said, but I bought a house 3 days ago in Flower Mound, Texas, and I had no idea why. Now I know. I hung up the phone. I called my wife. I said, honey, we're moving to Texas. She's like, what changed your mind? I said, God said to go to Texas. So we're going to Texas. That's how God works sometimes, right? So now we're excited. We're going to move to Texas, but we can't sell our house. And we're really getting excited. And I keep coming down to Texas. We keep visiting the house. And finally, they have to start building it. And the guy calls me and says, hey, I got to start building. It's the last house in the development. Still haven't sold my house in New Jersey. Hadn't had an offer, not a single offer, right? He calls me up one morning. He says, hey, sheetrock showed up today. What's the deal? I said, you're not going to believe this, but about an hour ago, we got a more than full price offer on our house. It's the only offer we've ever gotten for this house. I said, we got a deal. We're going to take the house. The family was moving from Dallas, Texas, to Green Village, New Jersey. That's just a little wink from God. That's how God works, right? Man, I got to step it up. So I come down and God uses me, and I start teaching the FA Drug and Alcohol School. I got a bunch of little initials after my name. I'm an interventionist and a drug and alcohol counselor, and so God allowed me to be part of helping set up the drug and alcohol program for 17 different airlines and the United States Air Force. When you turn your will and your life over to the care of God, He's going to find a place, for you to go. After 9/11, I lost two guys from my squadron died in 9/11. Several of my next door neighbors. It was quite traumatic, and they asked for volunteers to carry guns when you fly. It's a division of the Federal Air Marshal Service, and so I said, you know what, count me in. I'm going to go do this. And so I go in there, and you fill out an online application. So I tell the truth. I fill out the online application, and I go into the psychiatrist here in Dallas, and I go into his office, and he's got his little glasses on, and he's like, hang on a second, I got to pull you up. And he pulls me up, and he's looking at my answers, and he says, it says here, marijuana, yes. Cocaine, yes. Heroin, yes. And he's looking over his glasses at me, and he goes, you look familiar. And I said, yeah, I gave you your FAA drug and alcohol briefing. I taught you when you were up in Denver. He goes, yeah, that's where I know you from. Sure, I'll give you a gun. That was my interview, How do you go from being a 5-time drug dealer to being a federal officer without God and Alcoholics Anonymous, right? So I'm doing that, right? And I became a federal officer, and I helped set up a drug and alcohol program for that, and God took me to places that I couldn't even have imagined. And so I did that for 8 years, and like everything in my life, growing up basically without a father figure in your life, you carry father wounds. And I was always looking for validation. Instead of looking to God for validation, I was always float to the top of whatever I was doing. I'd become the best of the best or whatever, and I would try to make a difference, and hoping that someday that, you'd get the little pat on the back and say, hey, I'm really proud of you, which would never come. So I was going full bore at this, and my wife one day came to me, and I was working, 16 hours a day, 7 days a week at this job, doing tremendous work, helping people, but I had an AA widow at home. I was so busy giving away, and every phone call was, no, honey, you don't understand. This is really important. I got to take this call. And she was sick and tired of it. So we put that behind us. I was running an EAP program for 12,500 people. And one day you're doing that and you're working every day, and the next day you're not. And it's like all of a sudden, now where's your validation going to come from? And it sent me into a little bit of a tailspin. And I went back to the line and doing what I really love and flying airplanes. And it was 2010, and I'm over in London, England. And as a matter of fact, it was my anniversary. It was December 5th of 2010. And I'm exhausted. I've been up all night long, and we landed at like 6 o'clock in the morning in London and Heathrow. And by the time you get to the hotel, it's a couple hours later, and you wait 40 minutes for your hotel room, which is not cleaned because they got to wait for people to leave so they can clean a room before you have. So by the time I got into the room, I really was exhausted. But I said, you know what? It's my anniversary. I'm going to an AA meeting, period. That's what I'm going to do. And it had snowed, which is really kind of unusual. There was about 6 inches of snow in London, which they don't normally get. They get a dusting, and that's about it. It was a beautiful morning, the overcast, and there was a little hole where the sun was kind of like beaming through, and the snow had stuck to the side of this church spire, and it was like half covered with snow, and where the sun was shining on it, there was no snow there, and I'm looking up at it, and I'm thinking, this is just spectacular, and as I swing the corner, the sun had already been there, but it had refrozen, and it was black ice, and I slipped, and my leg went out from underneath me, and after, I don't know how many years of martial arts, like a dummy, I did not do a break fall. I tried to catch myself, and I twist over and fall, and I bang my hip, and I'm like, man, that hurt. And I kind of lie there for a minute, and I do a meditation real quick. Am I okay? I scan my body from the top down, and my hip really hurts, but I landed on my hip, so you must be okay. And I crawl over to the stone wall, and I climb up the stone wall, and I sit on the stone wall, and there's nobody around. I'm by myself because, it started snowing again, and I said, well, I can make it back to the hotel. So I go back to the hotel, I take a handful of Advil and Tylenol and go to bed. Get up the next morning, fly back to New York, and I go to the doctor, and the doctor's looking at my hip, and he's like, there's nothing here. We do a CT scan. He says, I don't know where this pain is coming from. Maybe you tore the bursa. I don't know what you did. And he says, but at the bottom of the report, it says you have severe arthritis in your lower spine. I go, I know this arthritis in my lower spine. What are you talking about? He goes, well, let's do a CT scan of that. And it turns out I broke my back. Right? On the way back from London, I had passed my chief pilot in operations, and on the way by, they were really busting people for calling in sick. And I said, hey, I slipped in London, I hurt my back, or hurt my hip, I'm calling in sick, so I'll save you a phone call of harassment. You don't have to call me and tell me why are you not at work, I'm calling in sick. What I didn't realize was he's going to put me on workers' comp, because I got an injury on duty, which I didn't ask him to do. And so I go see the doctor. He says, you got a broken spine. And he goes, we need to get you in for surgery. And then he comes walking out and he goes, I tried scheduling you for surgery, but your insurance isn't any good. I said, what are you talking about? He says, you're on workers' comp. I go, I'm not on workers' comp. What are you talking about? I called New York and I said, hey, what's up? He's like, oh yeah, you got an injury on duty. I put you on workers' comp. Which I didn't know about workers' comp is once you're on it, it's federal law. You can't use your insurance. You can't even pay cash. So I call the insurance company very dutifully and say, I need approval to get spine surgery. And they say, it shows here that that's a pre-existing condition. We're not going to pay. So I have to get into a legal battle. So it took 8 months to get spine surgery before I could win the battle with the insurance company. Needless to say, I got a little resentful during that 8 months, but thank God we have a step for that. So I wrote about it. But in the meantime, the bones were grinding on the nerves in my spine and ended up with severe nerve damage. And when I came out of the surgery, the doctor said it did not go well. And I said, what do you mean? He said, your spine looked like a black piece of linguine. He goes, I don't think you're ever going to walk normally. Your flying days are gone. You'll never fly again. Not arrogantly, but without hesitation, I looked him straight in the eye and I said, Doc, you don't know my God. I'm going to fly again. That started a bunch of years, almost 5 years of disability. I had to wear this thing. My leg didn't work right. My foot was dragging. I couldn't control it. Excruciating pain. It was like somebody stuck a hot poker in the bottom of my foot every minute of every day. And I would sit for hours in my office and just watch the second hand. Thank God for the military, because I'd been through POW school. And one of the gifts you can get if you ever are captive is time. If they'll give you a clock, they take away all clocks. But I had a clock in my office, and I would watch that second hand, and I would just make one more reason, if I can make one more minute, just one more minute. Needless to say, I was trouble to live with. My marriage took a hit. I got to the point where I was like an animal. I just was trying to survive. I didn't want to do anything but just survive. I'd go to a few meetings, and I was just trying to get through the day. And one day I was going in for some steroid shots, and I'm getting better, but not fast enough. And I can see my career is probably never going to come back. And the doctor's wheeling me in, and he says, hey, I was reading the AMA magazine, and he says, there's this weird study about old people with diabetic nerve pain, and they have pain in the bottom of my feet. And I said, well, yeah, that's where my pain is. I got this pain in the bottom of my feet. He goes, we put them on antidepressants, and the side effect of this weird antidepressant is it alleviated their diabetic nerve pain. You want to try it? And I said, what the hell do I have to, what do I have to lose? Sure, I'll try it. Within 48 hours of being on that medication for the first time in 3.5 years, I wiggled my big toe. The mind controls the body, not the other way around. So I started doing meditation every single day, and I was doing a lot of pain meditation. And I'd read a book by Bruce Lee, and he talked about how he had got injured with a back injury. He was never supposed to be able to fight. This is before he became a star. And he said that he focused his mind on healing his body. So I do this meditation, I'm focusing my mind, and what pops into my stupid head, but the 7 dwarfs. Right? I said, okay, that's what I got to work with, God. That's what I'm going to work with. I call it the hi-ho meditation. I would send the 7 dwarfs with their shovel and their pick and their dynamite stick, and I'd send them down there every single day, every morning, every noon, every night before bed. About a year and a half later, I walked into my doctor's office, and he was crying. He said he's never seen anybody with my injuries ever recover, much less get their career back. And today I fly the 787. I'm back in the cockpit again. How cool is that? Why do I tell that story? Because when you're in the pit and it seems like the worst thing that's ever happened to you, there's a wonderful little thing on page 133 of our big book. And we kind of glance right over it. Nobody ever likes to talk about it. But what it says is, but it is clear that we made our own misery. God didn't do it. Avoid then the deliberate manufacture of misery, but if trouble comes, cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence. Let me tell you, you try to be cheerful when you're in the pit. It is not easy. I have this great job. I sit on call. I hardly ever get called to go to work. They pay me a lot of money. It's almost like I'm retired. And because of the military, I'm a safety officer. So I said, hey, is there anything I can do safety-wise for the company? And they said, yeah. They made me this safety officer. So I am what's called a LOSA. So every other month, I get to go anywhere in the world and do a safety inspection. So what I do is I pull up and I tap on the computer and I find airplanes that have a bunch of empty seats and I say, honey, you want to go to Spain? She's like, absolutely, right? So I'm what they call an odd. I'm an odd LOSA. So this is my odd month. So on Tuesday, I'm all dressed up and I'm headed to the airport and I'm literally getting ready to walk on an airplane to go to Spain. And the phone rings and it's my son's counselor, my 20-year-old. And I said, what's up? And she said, I sensed something was wrong with him today. And so I asked him very probing questions and he's a very honest kid. And I said, yeah, so why are you calling? And she said, well, he had a plan. He had 50 medications he was going to take. When you were on the return trip from Spain, he was going to kill himself. He's written letters. He's got means, motive, and opportunity. She said, we cannot leave him alone. What are you going to do? I said, well, I'll be there, So I had the privilege of being able to drive home and call my boss and say, hey, I don't want to come back to work, but I got to take care of my kid, right? Nothing that I've experienced in recovery has felt so bad. I felt like I was emotionally castrated. I can't protect my kid. And what's that going to do to my wife and my other kids? When you're that helpless. He got Lyme disease and it messed him up neurologically. Lyme disease is a terrible disease. And we've spared no expense. He's been to the best of the world. He's had every type of therapy that you can have. So I can honestly say there's nothing that I haven't attempted. So it's time for applied serenity prayer, right? Accept the things I can't change. He belongs to God. I had to put him in my God box. And for those of you who don't know what a God box is, it's a cigar box that's glued closed with a little slit. And I write prayers. And when they go in there, it's God's. I can't get them out because it's glued closed. I had to put my son in the God box, right? I had to put my marriage in the God box. I had to put my sobriety in the God box. I wasn't thinking about drinking, but I go to page 133 and it says, cheerfully. How the hell are you supposed to be cheerful? But I did what I was taught in this program. I picked up the phone, I called my sponsor. Because I still, at 36 years sober, I have a sponsor. I called my sponsor, I said, hey, this is what's going on. I called all my spiritual advisors. I called all my guys from Steel on Steel. And for those of you who don't know what Steel on Steel, it's the coolest meeting. Steel on Steel, we get together on Sunday mornings, 7:30 in the morning, right? And we have 12 questions. And we answer the 12 questions, and it's timed. You get 4.5 minutes. And you give your answers. With 4.5 minutes, you don't have time to your ego to set up your answers. And we ask things like, do you have a sponsor? What step are you working on? What's the completion date for the step that you're working on? Are you doing the 12 daily prayers out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous? Are you doing the 12 daily review questions? How's your home life? How's your work life? Things like that, right? And then after you've shared the answers to those questions, you shut up and you take out a piece of paper and a pen, and the guys in the group give you feedback. And they ask you, is it possible questions? Is it possible that you're delaying finishing that 4th step? Right? And they give you all kinds of feedback like that, and then you have to take it back to God and your sponsor, pray and meditate on it, and see if there's any truth to it. And we hold each other accountable. 36 years in this program, and I still talk to at least 6 people a day. When I got sober, Carl Rizal gave me a roll of dimes, right? And for those of you who don't know, there were these things called payphones where you'd have to put dimes in there. He made me talk to 6 people a day. He used to say that alcoholism is like a wolf, and he said the wolf picks off the sheep on the outside of the herd. So you got to be in the middle of the herd. Today, I am desperately in the middle of the herd. I'm in there and I got all these guys around me. Today, I'm letting them carry me. I got my Saturday morning men's meeting. I don't miss it. I got up this morning, went to my Saturday morning men's meeting, and I cried in my Saturday morning men's meeting. I said, guys, I need some help. I need some guys that have some experience. And I had my buddy Mike. What a great guy. Part of my story I didn't even tell it is a few years ago I got ordained. I'm an ordained minister. And Mike called me one day and he said, my son just overdosed. Would you please do Hayden's funeral? And I said, yeah. And I could hear my own words that I had poured into Mike coming back at me this morning when he's talking about the potential of me losing my own son. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous works. The first word in this program is we. It's not I, it's we. We need each other, you know. Mike and Maureen, I mentioned them earlier. We used to go to couples meeting back in New Jersey. Every place I've ever lived, I've started a couples meeting. On Monday nights in Flower Mound, Texas, at 6:30 in Rock Point Church, there's a couples meeting. It's an open AA meeting, right? And the group conscience follows the long form of the third tradition, and we allow anybody that's there to share. And we talk about how to practice the 12 steps in our marriage, you know. So when my wife was coming unglued this week, worried about our son, I was able to sit down and pray with her, hold her hand. We were able to talk about the steps and how are we going to apply the steps and the traditions and the concepts. You know, when I had broken my back and I wasn't able to fly anymore, some people had been asking me to do a workshop, and so I did a workshop, and we called it Big Book Archaeology. We actually started an AA group, and we met for a year and a half, and we recorded every session of the group. And we covered the 12 steps in detail out of the Big Book, as if I was working with a sponsee. And we did the 12 concepts and the 12 traditions and the 6 warranties, and we recorded the whole thing. And I got a call from this wonderful little guy, Nikolai, in Ukraine. And he said, can I translate that? And I said, sure. The only reason I had time to do that kind of work for that year and a half was because I wasn't flying for my airline. I was home disabled. But I was able to focus my attention and energy on doing that. And I wrote study guides for the steps and the traditions and the concepts. And about 6 months before I got back to flying airplanes, I got a phone call from GSO. And they said, hey, we need somebody to go to Russia and teach the traditions and concepts. And we don't have anybody that knows the tradition concepts that can go do it. Would you do that? So I got a chance to go to Russia and teach the traditions and concepts. I have had the most amazing full life in sobriety, and it's only getting better. I have had highs that you cannot imagine where I've been able to help hundreds and hundreds of people. I bet you I get 6, 7 emails a week from people all over the world because I put my email on tape. And they call me up. I just got a phone call from a guy in Central Africa. And he says, we don't have good A here. Can you help me? And I said, yeah, you got FaceTime? And he says, no. And I said, well, do you have internet connection? He said, I can get to an internet connection. I said, well, I'll take you through the 12 steps over Skype. You know? There's not an excuse for not being able to get to an A meeting with the technology we have today. You know? I stand before you a broken man, a very broken man emotionally. I did not want to come tonight. But it's where I need to be. It's where my responsibility is, because I am responsible when anyone, anywhere reaches out for help. I want the hand of A always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. And today, I was responsible to make sure it was my hand that came to share with you people. I've had a full life. I've done this program. Every way you can do it wrong, I've done it wrong. And I've been forgiven because we have a step for that, because I was able to make amends. I've been taken all over the world and I've been given gifts. If you have never sat with some guy, whether shaken, you know, and you can smell the puke on their breath, and you take them through this work and watch them grow, that is the greatest gift, to get a front row seat to that. I would beg you, don't miss that opportunity. Do not miss it. It's the greatest gift in the world. To see a couple come in. At our group in New Jersey, we had a couple one time that literally stopped at our couples group on the way to the divorce attorney. About a month and a half ago, they came to Texas and they visited us. They were here. They're still married. They're happily married. And they've gone through highs and lows with their kids as well. You know, I've got 3 people in my couples group right now that I know that they were literally on the verge of divorce. They were living separate places. They've been thrown out. The guys have been thrown out of the house because of the drinking. They're back at home again, and they're putting their marriages back together again. That's the power of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you do the 12 steps and find a power greater than yourself. I stand before you, one of the luckiest men on the planet. I am desperately in pain, emotionally. But I know this too shall pass. Because I'm going to stand up and cheerfully get through this process. And I know there's going to be a silver lining. Whether my son lives or dies, I know I'm going to find some growth, because I'm going to look back on it, and I'm going to look back and see what the benefit was. And I will be able to use that experience to save somebody else's life somewhere in the future. Because I honestly mean it when I say I turned my will and my life over to the care of God. I have a sheet on the front of my desk that says patience, tolerance, kindness, and love. What I want doesn't matter. I don't get a vote because I work for God today. And that's what I believe. That's what I live. That's what I walk. If you don't know how to do this program, get alongside me. You can just watch how I live, you know. AA is not something I do. It says throughout our book, AA is not something we do. AA is something we live. It's a way of life. You cannot separate me from Alcoholics Anonymous or vice versa. It is how I live my life. If you're doing Alcoholics Anonymous, I would beg of you to get in here and make it a way of life. Because just doing it, it will let you down at some point. You'll screw it up. But when it's your way of life, no matter what happens to you, you get up, you suit up, and you have the disciplines. You don't break the disciplines. And that's why I'm here. And I can honestly tell you, even though I'm in excruciating emotional pain tonight, I am one of the luckiest men on the planet because I have God. I have a relationship. I have a working, talking, every minute of every day relationship with a power greater than myself, and he gets to show me miracle after miracle after miracle every day of my life if I'm just paying attention. So I'd like to thank the committee, and Joe, thank you so much for being after me. He's been trying to get me for 1.5 years to come speak. You know, if you've gotten anything from this talk, if I've made you at all uncomfortable, you're welcome. My intention wasn't to make you uncomfortable, but do not miss that still small voice that's causing you to be uncomfortable. It's telling you that something is wrong. You know, you got to be out of your mind to find God, because God resides in your heart. You got to get the drop. It's the hardest thing in the world. And this week, I've been praying to God, but I haven't been feeling God. I've been feeling disconnected, but I know He's there. He's as close as when I was pouring alcohol down my throat. He was still right there. He's right here. He's always been there. I just couldn't see Him. You know, so thank you from the bottom of my heart for the opportunity to come share with you. I hope I brought you a very atypical Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, because I hope I made you uncomfortable, you know, that you're willing to use it as a motivation. I love each and every one of you. You're my family. You're my family of choice. Thanks for letting me share. Bye-bye.